Hello, everyone. Welcome to Why Research Matters podcast, where we explore not only what scientists study, but why it should matter to the general public. Today, I'm joined with Dr. Yulia Akisheva. She's an aerospace engineer, a communication strategist, and founder of the platform TalkSmart. After beginning her career as an aerospace engineer and researcher, she transitioned into helping STEM professionals, scientists, and researchers in communicating their ideas with confidence and clarity. Her work focuses on challenges many experts face, translating deep technical knowledge into messages that public can understand and engage with. If you find this podcast interesting, don't forget to check out her platform TalkSmart and her book Insights from a Lifetime of Research for More Communication-Based Methods. Hello, Dr. Akisheva. How are you today?
Hello, I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. And I was really, this was really interesting because this is where my platform and your platform coincide because we are both working around why research matters and you're helping with the communication, which I think is the most important pillar where on which the STEM rests. So I want to start with this. You are an aerospace engineer by training, right?
Yes.
So what prompted you to going in this direction of STEM communication, training people rather than building rockets, working on aerospace design?
Yeah. So first, let me tell you the story a little bit shortly. So, I am an aerospace engineer by training, and I had a big dream of being part of the space sector. And when that first part realized as an already intern at the European Space Agency, I was loving it all, and I just wanted to get more and more of space. And then I did my original research and became a PhD student, finished my PhD, and I did research, not building rockets, but build protecting astronauts from radiation on the moon. And it was great. And then I was working with the best people who would work with me on accelerator based experiments and really at the edge of science. And then I left, yes, to start this STEM communications coaching business. And so the big question is why? And really, it goes back to when I first joined my space conference as a student. And I was very, let's say, excited to be there. And then I became shocked immediately at how people could not speak about their work, how just they seemed like they didn't have passion. And mind that people do have a lot of passion for their work in the space sector. Of course, you don't become an ionic propulsion engineer by chance, but so they have passion, but they cannot speak, they cannot transmit this passion about their work. And I was shocked. And that really, for me, was the very first exposure to a STEM conference, a space conference. And it's really made like a big impression on me. Although in retrospect, I cannot blame my fellow colleagues or space colleagues because they haven't been trained, right? It does require a lot of training and practice to become an effective communicator in any field. And in STEM, people have been quite pushed out of that training. Like there is this big gap between what we teach in STEM education and what is expected in work later. There is this huge gap in terms of all the STEM education barely touches on communication skills, and students, myself, I was an engineering student and barely got any training on effective communication, any exposure or opportunities to speak about my work to an audience, a public, right, other than other students. So there are very low stakes, like when we study as engineering students. Yet then you go out and you start working and you're expected to be able to take on a stage. So there is this huge gap, and I think it builds pressure on people, and who then maybe feel a little bit less capable, while these people typically are very capable and also confident in themselves and their intellectual abilities. So there's this big dissonance, I think, and that pressure needs to be bridged. And from my background, I got honestly at first lucky I was even pushed to do debating as a student, and later I became a coach myself. So I got that training through debating, and I started to apply that to my STEM outreach and my STEM communication. And I got really great feedback and a lot of applause. And I started to be invited as a PhD student to give keynote speeches, which was not normal, right? So I
Yeah.
thought that, okay, something clicks here. And I started to bring more and more of these best practices from debating and from public speaking into my own STEM communication. And bit by bit, started teaching other colleagues. So then, again, slowly, I started to get more and more attention to this, and then eventually decided that I want to dedicate my life to this, and I want to teach other STEM space professionals, largely STEM, engineers and scientists, to communicate more effectively and also to make it fun for them. Because for me, it became fun at one point. I fell in love with the stage, and I think it can be fun and it can be accessible. So that's my mission now.
Wow, that's brave actually, because building rockets and space engineering, aerospace engineering is really attractive field. And the chances that are there are huge, and you could leave a mark. And I think it's a service that you're doing because you are kind of training people to communicate ideas. So you mentioned that there is no training while we are doing our engineering, our PhDs, our masters, even later on during postdocs or any kind of, there is no training. So this is one thing. What do you think are other structural deficits which are there, which, lead these highly intellectual people, as you mentioned, to not communicate their ideas or their work efficiently? What are some other gaps?
Yeah, exactly. Building on to lack of training, there are very concrete psychological gaps or barriers, I would say. Because one thing is that I can explain to the people, the best tools and give them all the frameworks and ticks and trips and exercises. But if we don't go deeper into those couple quite simple, honestly, barriers, then people will not be able to apply these tools, right? And they're quite concretely very simple in the sense that, first of all, it's the fear of sounding dumb, like the fear of dumbing it down too much so that I don't sound smart enough. And that comes, I think, from our overall culture in STEM that, the authority and precision is basically our currency. So we need to appear precise and know it all, kind of. And then when you ask people to add a little humor or try to communicate in a simpler way or a more effective way, there is this barrier of, oh no, what if I sound stupid all of a sudden? Right. So this is a psychological barrier, number one. And another one, which is very close to it, is not being serious enough. So there's the sort of smartness level, and then there's also seriousness level, because I also think that in our education, and then also in work, we have this image of scientists, researchers, STEM people globally being very serious, very put together. And this seriousness is a real barrier for people to start using storytelling, humor, and other effective tools in communication. And so, if we don't tackle these quite, let's say, simple yet so deeply woven inside in our culture and in our even identities barriers, we can't get through to that effective communication stage. Like, people can comprehend, intellectualize why it's good to use this or that tool or how to make communication more effective, but they won't use it if they can't project themselves onto this image. So there are these very two main psychological barriers, I'd say. And then there's also a fear of standing out for some people. So when I work with individuals, I see that sometimes people don't want to have the spotlight on them when they are part of STEM, and that's fine. Everybody
Yeah.
chooses their own
Okay.
level of exposure. But then by being a
Uh-huh.
great communicator, you necessarily stand out from the crowd in STEM because overall, STEM public speaking is not at a great place yet, and in the average. So, like, you will necessarily stand out if you start to apply really some effective communication tools, and some people don't want to. So they opt out of that. Again, intellectually, just simply, I don't want to even try. So I think there is these barriers that people internalize, which come from our education, our culture, and also what is really out there in terms of work environment.
So the point that you mentioned is very interesting. That the you know, I might sound dumb if I introduce humor in my talk or start with a joke, but do you think it depends on the culture? Like, for example, when I was doing my PhD, the lab I was part of, we were very focused on presenting data and figures and numbers. And I was only supposed to talk about that. And because being a PhD student, I was having an authority above me, like my supervisor. They were uh, directing me to concentrate only on figures and data and not, you know, move out of focus, inject a little humor, talk something else, or even use some words. But when I moved for my postdoc to another lab, there I was told that I sound monotonous and I'm just like talking about data and figures, and I should, I should really sell my talk and my work.
Mm.
And I really struggled with that. So do you think it is also like culture? Because none of them was me. I was not a humorous person, but I'm also not too serious.
Mhm.
So there are these conflicting
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, yeah.
things that are happening. And
It's actually very common. Like, I often hear this as part of my workshops or even when I step in classrooms, and a lot of students, a lot of younger professionals ask exactly this question, and they have a person in mind often, and I go a little bit deeper and ask them, okay, tell me more about that story. And then when I ask them, and the person who kind of ruined the experience of public speaking for you or gave you that first feedback, first of all, do you look up to them in terms of how they do their own presentations and public speaking? And 99%, the answer is absolutely no. Like the opposite. Like, people don't look
Mhm.
up and don't like how those people speak. And then we dig a little deeper, and just it often comes down to that one person who themselves did not appreciate, let's say, humor or other tools of communication as part of STEM. So they uphold those barriers we just talked about of being serious, of like smartness equals precision and just dry talk and none of that humane communication that we're talking about. And so, since they have the authority or a position of power, they impose it on these younger students, typically PhD students, or even
Yeah.
younger before that. But then often, well, myself, I've seen that when I still pushed against that will as a student myself, and it then turns all around, because then the other people in the department, the other students, they notice that, they love it, and then that person is outnumbered, and then they have no power anymore of that situation. So I'm not saying that everybody should go against their mentors and supervisors as such. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want people to run into problems, but I've seen it from real experience that you kind of prove them wrong just by adding little bits and pieces. The important thing here would be not to go overboard from day one to day two. Like, if the person tells you to stick to data and be too dry, maybe just add one bit at the next team meeting and a little bit there and a little bit more next time, a little bit more till you find also your own voice. Because when you sound confident and you transmit that passion, that even sometimes even that person themselves turn around because they realize that, okay, the problem was never the presenter, the problem was just themselves, that they were afraid of finding humor pleasurable in STEM communication.
Yeah.
But so I would suggest to go bit by bit. And it is culture. I wouldn't say culture. I'd say it's just that unfortunate sometimes that one single person who also holds power can really ruin it for people, especially early on in their career. And then they keep that image. It can be even a traumatic experience, actually, especially if it was in front of other people. And then we carry on this trauma sort of along our career and continue reliving that situation in our head. So I'd say it's more of an unfortunate one-off in your life, because the rest of the people, if you tap into your authentic voice, the rest of the people will really love it and love you for it and want to book you as a keynote speaker and have seminars, etc., with you. So I would say it's more a problem of a broken ego. I keep saying that to my students that some people will have a little bit of a problem with their own ego and try to not let you tap into that creative side of presenting your work. But I would wish I could tell everyone find the courage, because it is your work. Like you said, in the end, it's your work, and you know how serious or humoristic of a person you are, where you are comfortable in terms of presenting. The most important thing is really to transmit that passion and, of course, the ideas, right? We're not talking about just putting on a show, but finding that right level for your communication. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, the way you explained this, I went back into my PhD years, and because there was always this, tussle that we are just sounding very nerdy, like just data, data, data.
Mm,
And sometimes, like, I'm a neuroscientist by training, and the ideas were so complex
mm,
that when I go to a conference, not everyone is dealing with, let's say, the same part of the brain or the same function of the brain that I'm trying to speak to them. And I need to really simplify it, or, at least get people interested. So that's where the I would try to inject a few bits and pieces of humor or analogies or things like that. What's your opinion on using analogies, or, could that be
I
one alternate to humor?
I love analogies. Analogies are one of the best because they are, if you nail it. So you have to find the right analogy, of course, because then you need to know who's in your audience. You can't use the same analogy for different types of audiences, right? If you give it to the people at the right time as well in your talk, then it will land perfectly, and people will remember you for that analogy, for that brilliant description or explanation that you developed through the analogy, right? So they stick in the person's mind. They are this vivid image that connects the dots in the brain. I mean, you know that better from neuroscience,
Yeah.
but they people will go away with that image and they will remember you for it. And then they can retrieve the information around their image in their brain later when they are already at home and they want to read up on your work.
Yeah.
Because there's this big misunderstanding or misconception I find working with scientists and especially younger professionals who idealize talking at a conference, because a lot of people think that, okay, I'm talking to professionals in my field, they already know everything, I only need to show them the best of my data or the best of my method. Well, that's a big misconception. Yes, you're talking to professionals, but in reality, like you said, they are from a different part of the brain or they study different part of rocket science, and they are super tired at that conference, and they have their own agenda at that conference. They're worrying about presenting or talking to someone and finding collaborators. Most of them are actually right there on their phones or on their computers while you're presenting.
Yeah.
So the reality of that communication is not at all what we romanticized in our head. We romanticize one-on-one, really sitting down to them and talking to that professional who's super interested. They are interested because they're at the conference, but the reality is not the same. So you have to bring it to their level. And that's why, like, analogy as well. We talked about humor before, but storytelling as well around your data. That's what wraps it. And that's what allows you to access their brain so that you can hack their brain so that they encoded this vital information you're trying to sell or propose, or maybe even, I don't know, disprove if it's a new theory or something. If you unwrap it in a story or through analogies, that's how you get to them. And then another thing I want to add is that another part to romanticizing it is also that in a lot of people's mind, this communication is complete. Like, I come on stage, I give you 15 minutes of my talk, and then you have it all in your brain and we've connected. Well, that's not it either. Most of the time, it's about planting a seed, making people interested in your work, and then hoping or doing the actual legwork so that then they go read your work and they go connect with you, and then you can actually make that meaningful two-way communication, right? So I would like to de-romanticize this conference communication for people, because that really kills a lot of opportunities for real networking and real what conferences are really for, at least by my read.
Yeah, true. And like, this is what you make an interesting point, that people there are already, tired and they're going through their phones. And also, like, it's always the format of the conferences that they publish all the abstracts and the how to say summaries of the talks and posters before in a catalog or a booklet, which is given beforehand, and you can always choose which talks to attend or which posters to go to. So I'm expecting that people would know something when they're coming to my poster, like if they've gone through that booklet, obviously. So maybe if I just synthesize the idea in an interesting way, it will be worth their visit, right?
Yeah. And it will be another invitation to continue, right? The conversation.
True, true. So let's say a first time a conference attendee receives an invitation to one of the Keystone conferences, and they're super excited because they're one of the prestigious conferences. So what is your suggestion to them? How do they even start before they start sitting on the laptop, opening the PowerPoint? Is there some kind of psychological or some kind of work they need to do before they just even open their PowerPoint presentation? Like,
Yes.
start building it.
First of all, one thing to understand is that an oral communication of this kind is a entirely new work. A lot of people out there just think that it's a transformation of my written work. Typically, you have written an article before, or you have applied to a conference with an abstract, extended abstract, or even, well, something you have applied for that conference, right? So, and a lot of people take it as a translation. I take what I've done already or my data and I just put it in a new format of slides. And that's my presentation for a conference. Well, that's the first mistake. It's not that at all, right? A conference oral presentation is a new experience, is a new communication, a different type of communication. And the first thing to do is to identify for yourself, okay, who is my audience? Who is there? Second, what do I want with them? So your personal communications goals as a presenter. And then what's one main message that I want them to remember? Why? Because first of all, audience changes what kind of explanations we're going to give, where we're going to spend our emphasis on, right? Your goals are very important because if you don't even stop to think, what do I want with this presentation? Then you cannot really define the impact of your work, how are you going to present that during your presentation. And finally, that main message is simply because people will only remember 2% of what you say. People do not remember details of your talk. People remember maybe one key data point or one key, let's say, finding. And then they remember the overall impression that you made on them, the feeling. And then from then on, they will maybe engage with you more or less or not, right? And that's why you need to, back to the first point, that's why you need to know who is in your audience so that you can actually make that bridge. And the second point is actually overlooked a lot because sometimes people think that you present for the sake of presenting your work. Well, I disagree with that. I think we should clarify in our heads that I'm presenting, maybe I want to showcase my work because it's brand new, or maybe I want to get insights on my methodology in the poster sessions, in the breakout rooms, in the networking time, or even through the Q&A right after my talk, right? Or maybe I want to prove it, disprove something, or maybe I just want to inspire a new collaboration or interns. Like in my personal career, so back when I was presenting my research, I did all of these things at different conferences and I constructed my speeches differently. Like when I was targeting getting new intern, I was doing a lot more inspirational talk than the deep technological explanations, right? And then I got these young students running to me literally after the conference, and I was like, okay, send me your CVs. Another time, I was targeting one specific person in the audience. I knew that they were in the audience because I wanted them to collaborate with me. So then I was showcasing more my ideas for experimentation, how I already have a plan, etc., because I knew that that's what they would get hooked on, right? So your personal goal for this talk, it cannot just be I talk about my work. Well, I think then you're missing out on a lot of opportunities, I think. So there are these three things to give clarity on. I would start with a piece of paper, without opening laptops and going to slides. That should be the last thing you do. But get that clarity first. And then from then on, you'll see how you build because maybe you will start with the results. I've done that once. I've started my
Yeah,
talk once with the results and not with the
yeah.
introduction and explanations, etc.
Me
Then
too, me
yeah,
too.
yeah, and it worked, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm never sat down with a paper because when I was a PhD, the most interesting part for me and a kind of a win for me was that I got invited to speak. And also, this will be another point in my curriculum vitae that I presented at so and so talk. I didn't bother about all the points that you're mentioning, the clarity that comes with writing all the goals on the paper, knowing the audience. So, yeah, that was something.
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
then your goal was this, and right, you achieved it. So you see, if you had that clarity already, we're one step ahead.
Yeah, sure,
Mm.
sure. Yeah, so that's what we were talking in the beginning. We miss out on the communication training and then we miss out on all these points. So,
Yeah.
okay, now we have the clarity. What's the next step?
In preparing your talk, well, let's see. Once you know what you want to achieve, you know who is your audience, you're going to start to construct your narration, right? I would suggest to start with the big picture, the big structural question of what are you going to talk about and why you're talking about it. And then bit by bit adding your, if it's net methodology, data explanation, or whatever it is. Maybe you're showcasing the results of an experiment, etc. But make sure that every single thing you add to that slide deck, by now we already opened our computer and we're starting to craft something.
Mm.
Every single thing you add, make sure you know why you're adding it. Not because, once again, you've done the work and you have all these graphs and they need to go there. No, you have to make sure that, okay, I'm adding this one graph because it explains something or something like that. Or I'm adding this formula because it's essential, it builds to the understanding of this or that. Maybe you don't need a formula in every single presentation. Maybe you need a picture or analogy, right? And it will tell the same thing much more effectively. And again, a lot of people, it seems maybe trivial, but a lot of people never stop at this level. They just dump a lot of stuff that they have in their articles, on their computer, into the form of slides, and then try to talk about it instead of crafting it from the point of view of the audience. Okay, what do they need to hear from me so that they understand, they follow my train of thought, and we arrive together at that big why. Why am I talking about this? That clarity.
Oh my God, you're just pointing out all the mistakes that I have made myself. And because the advice I received was you put everything on the presentation and then we'll remove whatever we think is, either time consuming or it's not important.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, we were really struggling to, like fit within the time limit or, we have been given just 15 minutes and this,
Yeah.
let's remove this or that. Or so,
But
yeah.
why that happens? Why that doesn't work? Because you remove based on your expert knowledge. Like as much
True.
as you are in the neuroscience, you still cannot get into the heads of your people, right? Of the audience,
Yeah.
I mean. So we will remove based on our filter. We think, oh no, that's not so relevant. Okay, we have to save another minute. Okay, let's take off this and that. But we keep the main graph. But for the people, the build-up means everything, maybe. I'm talking hypothetical, but like let's say you have one important or big piece of data, let's say you put it into a graph. Or let's take a table. Tables are the worst, actually. Graph is a little bit easier. Let's take the worst. Tables are killers. And well, engineers, they love tables. So that's why I know that. But let's take a table. You have this magnificent table that you worked on for 3 years. You need to have it in your slides at some point of the presentation. And from your filtering, you're going to say, we keep that. And you start to take away all the information around it, all the build up, because you expect people in the audience to be expert enough to understand it. What happens? Table comes, it scares people away. They start to make a little bit of their own sense of it from their own expert perspective and their filter. They make a different sense of it than you intended, and the communication is broken. So you need to make sure that the build up to that table or graph or that complicated, the pinnacle of your whole study, that the build up is done correctly. And then you can show it for way less time, and then people will follow your train of thought. What happens is the opposite. But why? Because you already know that information. So you are pretty much incapable of filtering out what you already know to the level of your audience, right? Especially if you didn't do the first exercise of making it clear, like who's in my audience? What do I want with them? What's the bottom line message I want them to take away from this, right?
So tables are really the killers. But see, my point is, and you also mentioned it, we have worked on something for 2 to 3 years,
Mm,
to struggled hard and hit and trial and all, back
mm.
and forth with getting this result. And now it's there. And I want to show it off. So,
Yes.
like, I have done the work. I'm a very hardworking scientist. That's also the psychological thing that's happening in my brain. So,
Yeah, I know. I feel that. I've also felt that myself, and all of us feel that. Well, how you treat tables. First of all, the smaller they are, the better. The more non-existent they are, the better.
okay.
Me, meaning even formatting, even taking away the lines and stuff like that. Like if we're talking now about more design, so that people can digest it and not be as scared because it is a barrier, and then making them small and guiding people through them, so not taking anything for granted, not taking the sort of the labels on top for granted, the units for granted, the size of it for granted. Everything has to be incremental so that people can actually engage with it, right, and work with the table. What happens a lot is that people just go, okay, next slide, now is our result, and then there's this huge table which people don't even spend time really going deeper into. Maybe just say the
I
general
get it.
trend of the table, but not the whole thing. And then why do you put it? But that's again because people do not stop and ask, why am I putting this? Is this adding value to the narrative or not? You know, if you stop a little bit, like a few seconds even, okay, I want to put that. Before that urge happens, just stop and ask yourself, why am I putting it? Is it adding value to my audience? Or do I have to spend a little bit more time and maybe reformat it? Right? Because tables are very great formatting tools for written communication, especially if we do reports and articles. It's
Yeah.
fantastic, right? Or even to use tables to then plot graphs or find trends, etc. Again, in written communication and working with it, right?
Mhm.
But visually and in oral communications, they just don't work. So maybe you have to find another way to present that same one piece of data inside that you want, or a trend. And there are some very concrete tips and tricks out there that you could learn and try, but it takes time. So then it takes the will to actually work through it, right? To get to that point that it actually serves the audience.
Get it. Yeah. So, what about, like, you talked about design, and so there are several aspects of design. How do we choose the color scheme? What kind of images we can use in the introduction? And now with the, like, flood of AI generated images that we can just use a prompt to generate, and the image generates kind of a concrete way of presenting our idea. What are your opinions on that?
Trade with caution, be cautious. It's very easy to slip into that comfort zone of especially using AI now for everything. And it's fine, use AI, but use it for, again, achieving that clarity, getting to across to your audience. Um, so like I will invite everyone to read more concrete examples on my Substack where I talk about these specific
Hmm.
tools and design points, etc. But like one thing, let's take one thing that happens in STEM, all over STEM, that I've seen, at least from aerospace engineering, is that people love these stock photos that kind of
Yes.
make sense for your presentation, but not really. And especially that not yours. A lot of people like, I'm presenting at an aerospace conference, let me stick a picture of a satellite, of a rocket, of a rocket launch, or of a plane. And I cannot tell you how many times I have been on master and PhD defenses of students, and I've asked them, so this plane you put up here, what's that model? Or what does that have to do with your presentation? And they would be like, I know, but that's just a funny picture I put. And that just kills me. It's like you waste my attention as an audience on this picture that doesn't even make sense to you, and you don't even know where it's from. And it's a stock image that you took from the internet. And now with AI, that's why I'm saying be cautious. It's so easy to just generate anything that looks pretty and kind of works, but then you are diluting the attention of your audience. You're probably giving them misinformation at that point, you know? And most of all, it probably after a few slides becomes like a visual pollution because our eyes get tired of these big images, especially if it's a stock image of like a, even a, I don't know, a brain or a plane again or a satellite. We get tired of it. So I would say use it when you really need to. At the introduction somewhere could be a good idea, but again, not just as a background noise, but as a valuable input of information.
So, again, the kind of advice I received, and now I see the contrast from what you're saying. There's a lot of this thing that is put on us that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So why use a lot of text on the
Hmm.
presentation, but rather put a nice picture which just presents your idea? So
Well,
do you
that
think we should find a balance between what we are trying to say and what picture we are choosing?
Yes, exactly. Choosing, right? So a nice picture that I've heard myself as well. Nice picture doesn't add any value, any knowledge. There's no knowledge transfer with a nice picture. But with a picture that serves the purpose of demonstrating whatever you're talking about, then yes, and you must include it, right? If you're talking about, I don't know, if I'm talking about my research of radiation protection of astronauts, right? Just putting a picture of an astronaut doesn't add any value. If anything, it distracts from whatever I'm talking about. Like a pretty picture of an astronaut behind me. Who are they going to look at? Obviously, at the astronaut. And they're going to
Yeah.
think of becoming astronauts and their own dreams, and they're going to go away from me. But if I'm talking about a part of the astronaut suit that serves the purpose of radiation protection, and I need to showcase where it is that it's protecting certain parts of the body because certain organs are more susceptible to radiation,
Hmm.
etc. And we've thought about it, and then I'm going to zoom in on that and showcase that, give people enough time to understand what I'm talking about, and then take it away because it served its purpose. I don't need it there forever in the background to again confuse people and let them go on their own train of thought, right? About text, of course, yes, that's still good advice, like less text on slides and less sort of conflicting information. That's important. Like, don't put text on top of a picture. That happens a lot as well in STEM, especially in space and science, because people think, okay, we've seen the picture, let's blur it out a little bit and then put add bullet points or text on top. Like that's
Yeah.
fun. That's tiring for people. It's not fun. That
Mm.
again does not serve your purpose of getting to your audience and helping them understand your points, right? So we have to be intentional about it.
What about choosing font colors, the color scheme, or the background designs? Like, they matter, of course, right?
Yeah, they matter. There is a lot of research on that as well. Some of it is pretty basic. There are some ground rules, let's say, in terms of like the font and the placement of things, like where people's eyes fall, on the screen. So you should put vital information there. It's typically a little bit under the middle of the screen. Then of course it depends on the setup. If you're in a huge amphitheater or if in a small conference room, it changes a little bit, but typically. So there are a couple of rules that you can read up on to just know what to avoid and what definitely to do. And in terms of color schemes, well, I would say be cautious of people who of putting colors that don't match together, and that's also very easy to find information about that online, so that you don't confuse people or even provoke certain kind of bad feelings when they look at your screen. And then maybe important part is the base color, so the background color, right, should not be too distracting away from you and should not be tiring for the eye. I mean, it's quite
Okay.
simple. And I think just place yourself in your well, you've been there, you've been in those shoes when you were the audience, especially the lecture, and the professor didn't think about any of that, and
Yeah.
they put these colors which just blind you, and you are tired, you cannot focus, you cannot really focus on the information anymore, you just want to turn away, you're just waiting for it to end, right? So that's just kind of user experience for our
Yeah.
audience, and I think it's more straightforward than we think about it, with just a couple of being mindful of these things. And a lot of information is out there online already, and then think about your own experience.
Understood. Yeah, because I remember doing one of my presentation and I was using all the blue and shades of blue and green, and then I was told that, well, a lot of people in the audience who are colorblind will not be able to process these. So why don't you stick to the, the darker shades like blacks and grays, and so the font color. And that was a really important point for me, that okay, I never paid attention to that point before.
Mm.
So
Colorblindness is yes, something to be mindful of, and an easy way to, if we're talking about graphs, an easy way to avoid it is, well, to use different types of lines, maybe, right? Or animation, adding things on top and showcasing people
hmm
the legend of your graph, so that it's not just one information at the same time, but like bit by bit, incrementally, and you work with it so people can understand it in real time and not just have to stare at it and like make their own sense of it. And then the one other thing to be mindful of is that when we work on our small computers, the colors look pretty to us, but because it's a different resolution, it's a different source of light. But when we have a huge projector and we're projecting the same colors, it's not going to be necessarily the same. So that's maybe also why green and blue could have worked aside of color blindness, but could have worked pretty on the screen. But then when it's on the big projector, it may even look the same. Sometimes, there are these choices of colors which in the end look the same if it's not
yeah,
that great of a projector or resolution, because you may not know what kind of setup they're going to have. So to be
yeah,
mindful of these things as well.
yeah, this happens so often. In fact, recently it happened with my husband, who is also in STEM, and all the presentation that he prepared, and they went to the venue and was testing out his presentation, and it just didn't look the exact impact. It was not giving the exact impact. The fonts were all blurred out, so he had to work on it all over again.
Mm.
And these things, I guess, kind of in the last moments could, were make you nervous, and rather than focusing on your speech, you focus on preparing it again. So that's kind of
Yeah.
yeah, that's so. Okay, now we have done the presentation, we have the idea, and now we are working on our speech. So couple of questions there. How do we draw the line between complexity and simplifying it for the audience? Where
Hmm.
should, so that we don't oversimplify and the data doesn't lose its how to say, the depth,
Yeah.
and it still sounds that we are not giving talk which is oversimplified or overcomplicated.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of sounding repetitive, I'm going to say one thing. Actually, the difference between oversimplification and clarity really comes from the fact that we didn't work enough on working out who is our audience. It's really all
Okay.
coming down to that. Because what is simplification? It's just bringing down the information to the right level, right? And in the essence of it, it's simple. If you know your work, it's easy. It's like following a recipe. Like I can measure out a cup of water easily, or
Mm-hmm.
one spoon of salt, whatever. I can know myself the steps I need to take to simplify. Now, oversimplification, well, in my ideal world, should not exist, in the sense that when you know for whom you're simplifying, there's simply no way to go over. It's like,
Okay. Yeah.
I know how to serve you your food. I know you're intolerant for this or that. I'm not going to do that for you, right?
Okay.
It's kind of straightforward in this sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for example, or let's first distinguish. Clarity is removing the extra clutter, removing complexity to get to the main point, right? To a clear image. Now, oversimplification is actually the opposite, is when you removed all the essential complexity. So you removed the core and then you're left with nothing, right? In my example, if we were talking about radiation protection in astronauts, oversimplification would be just saying space radiation is dangerous. I mean, it's correct, but it doesn't give you any information. It's useless, right? Space radiation is dangerous. Okay, right? So that's oversimplification. Whereas if I was doing something about on clarity, I would still bring it down a notch depending on my audience. Right now, we're talking about people for this podcast. So it's people who are roughly exposed to different kinds of STEM, different parts of STEM. So I'm going to bring it down to a comfortable level and say something like radiation can be deviated or changed if it is acted upon by a magnetic field or a target material, a shielding. And in space, we do not have, in outer space, we do not have the magnetosphere of Earth. So the exposure to radiation is more dangerous than on Earth. So we need to think about the shielding and also the time of exposure to limit the mission to protect our astronauts. So you see, I simplified it down to a general STEM aware audience without getting out the essential. Whereas in the first bit where radiation is dangerous, well,
Yeah.
yeah, but it doesn't give me any information or any actionable information anyway. And what I see in reality, there are like, I break it out into three parts of an engineer background, and maybe you can tell me if it works also with folks who do neuroscience research. But let's say researchers from my part of STEM, when they're young, typically they over complexify because they want to prove themselves. So in their presentations, they go for the top. They go for everything. They give you all the formulas, all the epsilons, on the everything
Mm.
that they don't not even fully operate yet. They can understand it, but they don't operate it yet. All the jargon and the abbreviations. They love abbreviations. It's like as if it was a stamp of like approval. I know these abbreviations.
Yeah.
So they completely go overboard. Then on the other side of the spectrum, there are sometimes these brilliant professors who really you can only understand if you already know what they're talking about, because some of these professors go overboard in their creativity and all they do is storytelling without bringing it down to the level of their audience. So I've seen such professors in my school where they're like on their own cloud nine talking about something which seems relevant to them, but as an engineering student, you have no clue yet. So you cannot get on that level. So you completely miss that as well. And then in the middle, there are, let's say, more typical engineers who are simply scared of oversimplifying because they're scared of losing the precision. And that's back to what we talked about, the fear of being not smart enough or coming across as not smart enough and also not serious enough. So they're just scared of oversimplifying and they don't do it and they don't do anything with it. So they just stay on their own level with that filter of already knowing a lot of information, obviously too much for your audience, because otherwise, why would you be talking to them if you have nothing new to add? You know more than the audience, right? Because you've done that extra work, that new research. So there is a certain, let's say, hierarchy in terms of knowledge. That's why we're talking about knowledge transfer when it's STEM communication, right?
Mhm.
And that's what brings us back again to understanding your audience. So, who are they? What level of STEM exposure do they already have? What brings them here today? Are they here because they came by themselves, or is it a meeting that they were forced to be here? You know, do they have decision making power? Are they more, let's say, politically invested and they're here on a tangent? They need to be here. They
Mhm.
need to listen to my story and to my work, but they're here with different stakes. And then answering these questions will actually bring you clarity and will make it really simple for you to simplify to the right level. And you won't feel like you're oversimplifying, because that oversimplifying typically comes from the idea that, okay, I'm talking to them as if they were stupid, or I'm talking to them as they were children. You don't need to talk to them as if they were anything. Make sure you know who is in front of you, and then it will be easier and clear, and you don't have to fear overdoing it, right?
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So, in one of your Substacks, I think it was a few weeks ago, you mentioned about use of emotion in while communicating your ideas, especially during talks. And I'm not talking humor, but what about like passion and excitement? And can we go overboard with this or under,
Mm,
what level of passion or excitement? Because I've heard some talks where people mention, wow, I got this data. And I thought like this looked like a show off or like
mhm,
self appreciation or like we're just presenting we got this data but not being excited about it. So
mhm,
you know what
mhm,
I'm all these instances which I think is like lack of emotion or too much of emotion is
mhm. Yeah.
messing up with the talk.
Yeah. Well, too much emotion, whatever it is, it's like difficult to put a finger on it. I think it starts with you, in the sense that you have to dial it up yourself to the right level where you're comfortable with. It's when we're not comfortable ourselves, that's when it shows to the others. That's when it becomes performative. Then it's when it becomes inauthentic, and we think that they're just showing off or they're just putting on a show and they're just like a Shakespearean actor who is trying
Mm-hmm.
to sell the signs. But it really comes down to us. And that's a process. I cannot sort of sell it in any other way or promise any magic treatment. It's really a process of finding out where's your comfort with it and trying it out with different types of publics. Not do not go fully or like full mode on that first conference that we talked about and be over the board excited
Mm-hmm.
if you haven't tried it before, because like for example me, I let myself go quite to the top of my emotions when I present my work, but that's because I'm comfortable with it. I've gone through that school of self, especially when I was a debater. When I went overboard in debating is totally allowed because you're trying to convince and persuade others, right? So it's a little bit different stakes, it's a little bit different goal as a presenter. Whereas when we're presenting STEM work, research, it's maybe more knowledge transfer, or maybe you're looking for a collaboration, or maybe you're looking for an input to like feedback that people give you on your own work. So there's a different goal in mind, right? But so back to my example, I have had the sort of privilege to try it out on different publics, these different emotions, and go overboard and then hear feedback and watch recordings of myself. I mean, it was competitive debating we're talking about. So that's real work. And I know my bounds sort of, right? And I know when I'm gonna, okay, for this conference, I'm actually going to go out a little bit and try with this audience. I'm gonna go a little bit more than normal and see the reaction. I can afford it because I also enjoy doing these experiments myself. At the starting point, I would suggest really step by step, show excitement, try to see where you want to show that excitement in your talk as well. Again, be intentional about it. My suggestion would be give people a little bit of emotion in the beginning so that they can, well, feel good about what's coming next.
Mm-hmm.
And very importantly, when you want them to engage, either intellectually to engage to understand an important or difficult part of your presentation, or maybe towards the end when you want them to ask questions or do something else with you, like at that engagement, they should feel something coming from you. Because emotion is all about reciprocity and all about our audience being able to project themselves onto you, right? That's why we need that passion. You cannot, that's why, like your example from the beginning of this conversation was that when you were monotonous and people gave you that feedback, why did they tell you this? Because they felt it themselves and they did
Yeah.
not like it. So they told you,
Mm-hmm.
try to change up something, right? So that we
Mm-hmm.
feel it. So it's all about that. And again, you're serving the audience. You think of what emotions you want to elicit in them, and then you have to project it so that they can feel it and they can project themselves onto that. And that's how they're going to engage emotionally. And also, emotional learning is a big part to encoding new information. So that's important if you just want to even teach. Like, if your goal is pure knowledge transfer in this talk, if it's more of a seminar, I'm going to teach something, you still need to evoke these emotions because otherwise, the emotional learning part will not happen and you might lose them.
So how do we judge when we are on the days and there is an audience in front of us?
Mm,
Like I personally felt that I could feel that disconnect whenever I'm going too slow or this I'm losing my audience, and then I have to tune it up a little, the
yeah.
emotion. I like say something that brings them back, or just put waves like ups and downs in my tone that keeps them engaged. So, like, how do you judge that when audience is becoming, as a speaker, are there some signs that we can judge audience is not interested anymore?
Yeah. The first thing is this.
Ah.
When when people sit back in their chairs, especially if they're like comfy chairs, or lean out, and cross their hands, and this is very easy to see in the audience, that means you're not connecting with them, or they are actually physically kind of trying to sort of go away, right? Um, the opposite is obviously when people sit on the edge of their seats and they're like excited and they really want to get in with you and talk to you about this, right? Almost like feel like one on one. And of course, nodding, laughing at your jokes, looking at you in the eye, these things are clear shows that they are into it, right? Other things that clearly show you they're not into it is when they start talking to the other person, but not to discuss sort of in an interesting way, but like in a completely turning away and yeah, I'm disconnected kind of way, right? So all of this is easy to see. But the important thing here is to, when you commit into it, make yourself, give yourself a threshold or give yourself a number of how many people you will allow to do that. And that will not affect you as a speaker. Because,
Can I do that as a speaker? Like, is that
well,
in my power?
I mean, in your power, in your psychological power to yourself, so that it doesn't throw you off. What I'm trying to say is that it will happen every now and then, even to the best of speakers, because we do not all perform on the same day, on a different day, the same way, right? Something may happen, or you may have miscalculated your audience and your jokes don't land, or something like that. But just make sure that for yourself, you allow, okay, if 10 people out of 100 seem disconnected, it's fine for me for this performance, so that you don't get inside your head and start thinking, oh no, I need to get them back. But if it's just a few, probably that's fine, right? Because that's another part of romanticizing communication, is that 100% of the people will be 100% of the time into whatever 100% of what you say, right? That's not reality. So like, be ground yourself, be real with yourself in terms of, okay, how many people do I let go in this talk? And then just make sure that you kind of auto tune yourself on stage to that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this happens a lot now with phones and everything. Sometimes people are just in their phones checking email or whatever, and then.
Mm.
But it has also happened. The person that I thought that who was least interested suddenly got up and asked me a question. So I was like, "Oh, you were listening." So yeah, that can also happen, and that just I miscalculated looking at you that you were not interested at all. So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't
That
know.
can happen. That happens to a lot of us. There's this one surprise outlier who was seemingly
Yeah.
not interested, but they were super interested. They maybe
Yeah.
have read your work before, even. So they would, maybe they're taking notes on the phone. Sometimes that happens instead of just like looking at the phone, right? So I would say don't get too much into your head into that in real time, because that can really ruin the experience for you. And then, if you focus on these 10 people who are off, you're missing out all the other signals from the rest, right? You still have to
Hmm.
do both. You have to notice the good signals that they are sending as well, or the others, right?
Okay. Moving a little back, I think I missed on asking you that question. What about my body language while I'm speaking? Because sometimes there's a desk in front of us and the mic is there. And like, I personally prefer moving around the stage and going from left to right, depending on where my figure or graph is located, and using the laser pointer. But given that there's a desk and a mic there, so if I stand, I'm looking behind at my slides, and I kind of lose contact with the audience and
Hmm.
not in front and focusing in front. So what are your suggestions on that?
Yeah. My main suggestion is do what you know you can do. And it sounds very vague, but in concrete reality, it means if you know you need to move, move. Think about it this way. They put all these things on stage to maximize the potential performance of any given speaker. And some speaker needs a mic and others don't. Like I don't need a mic unless I'm speaking in front of 1,000 people. So I don't take these mics. I just put it
So
away
you worked on your projection,
and
right?
I use my voice exactly. Coming back to thanks to debating again, I project my voice, and I also need to move. I know that, and I love moving on stage. I don't like static performances as in terms of public speaking in general, and I don't like to be static. And it also works against your nerves, kind of. It really helps to move. So if you like it, if it works for you, move. The only place where I couldn't move is that when I was doing a TEDx talk and they put that red square, red
Yeah.
circle. You have to stay within the circle. But even then, I was like moving on the boundaries of the circle if I wanted to, right? What I'm saying is, again, they give you the clicker, they give you the mic, they give you the lectern, they give you a chair, but then it's your choice. It doesn't mean you have to sit in the chair. It doesn't mean that you have to be hidden behind a lectern. If you're comfortable with it, go away, use the stage, etc. Do what you need to do. But it's like, to all one size fits all setup, but you don't need to use all of it, right? And in general, I suggest that yes, move if you need, and if you can, work with your slides. Definitely try not to turn away like I'm showcasing now while talking, because that is a
Mhm.
horrible experience for the audience. And overall, communication is a full body experience. That's why it starts, with your face, with your emotions, with your gestures, the whole body, the posture, moving around, using the space around you. All of that is very important.
And all this takes time to develop over the course of years of your STEM education, or, like I learned over the way that I had to dress a certain way. I
Mm.
had to work on my hand movements, or,
Yeah.
and at times things broke in between the talk and I
Mm.
lost my nerve and I learned to overcame that.
Mm.
So, uh,
It does take time. It does take time. It takes courage, honestly, like to try these things, to be intentional about it. And okay, in the next talk, I am going to use my hands, my gestures. I'm not going to have my hands in my pockets anymore or anything else, right? And the suggestion there is to, well, be observational, see what you enjoy in other speakers, and try it at home, practice it at home. Really, it's as simple as doing it in front of the mirror. Why? Because first of all, you have to train your brain into accepting it, as that's the new norm for us to talk about our work this way.
mhm.
You have to train your brain into thinking it's okay, and then it will be okay in front of others, right? Don't do
Yeah.
too many new things right on stage, right? You have to
Mm-hmm.
practice and ease yourself into it.
Understood. Okay, so what about now? I like to shift gears a little. What about written communication? I know that you're an expert on that also. You talk a lot about that in your Substack and your newsletters. And I recently read a very interesting newsletter from you, which was talking about using this acronym BLUFF. And I really loved it. Like, bring the lines first, which are most important. Please explain it to us in your own
Yeah.
words?
Yeah, so bluff is a communication technique that, well, actually comes from army communication. And they have no time to give explanations, and they need to give orders fast. And most importantly, it needs to be clear, because it can be really life or death if it's not clear, right? So they came up with this acronym BLUFF, which has been taken elsewhere, and I want to promote it to STEM as well, because I find it
Mm-hmm.
really effective for STEM. Bottom line up first. So, especially in your written communication, and I think in emails, I think it works the best. Give the bottom line first in one or maximum two sentences, what you want in that message, and then you can add the context or the details as a next paragraph or bullet points or whatever. But with that bottom line at front, you are giving people clear direction. Okay, this is the essence of my message, and I need this from you. So typically you say, like, please review this proposal by Friday, and that's clear. That's it. That's the bottom line
Mm-hmm.
first. And then you can say that in the review, you will see three proposals that the team worked on for a while. And we suggest A, but we want your approval. That's it. Instead of saying, the opposite way of starting. Like 3 weeks ago, we launched this study and went over the details of A, B, C, D, and then A was slightly better performing at this percent, and then the person is already not reading anymore. Why? But why are people not reading? Because they're waiting for your follow up. We have made it so that often, and people have told me that in private, sort of confessed that I don't even read these long emails anymore. I just wait for the follow up, because in the follow up, it will be clear and to the point.
But sometimes isn't it just the way of how to say, the way of conversation? Like, hope you're doing well. I want to touch a little bit upon what we discussed earlier, or something, sort of that kind of opening, and then come to the point. Let's say I'm inviting you to the podcast, and I really like your Substack, and should I just
Right.
write that I run a podcast and I'm inviting you? Like, what is the best way?
Well, with me personally, yeah, it's better to just go straight. But but I do get that when you're breaking ice. I mean, when you're doing cold emailing, yes, I think you need a little bit more background and the politeness and niceties at the beginning. But my example before was more about work communication emails when you're already like part of a team. You're in the middle of a project or you're updating people on it, and then you want to, even when you're updating people on a long-term project. For example, in my PhD, I had a whole consortium of people who were supporting it in different ways, like financially
Mhm.
or as experts, etc. And they gave them from time to time these email updates, and they would be super long. But I made it an effort to make a super executive summary in the beginning, so kind of bottom line up front, and then the whole longer explanation, etc. And I find, honestly, to finish with niceties is even nicer sometimes. Like to finish with a nice
Oh,
note, like, hope you're also doing well and we can catch up soon again, or I'm open for online coffee, whatever. I don't know. But that's maybe a personal touch. It's just that I would like for people to be a little more intentional in their online communication or written communication as well, which a lot of it happens online. And especially when it comes to work, right now, there's so much information. It's like all the email boxes are over flooded. People really struggle to stay focused and extract this most vital information so we can help them. I think it's a good sort of cultural shift, especially that we are working more and more sort of online from home or hybrid, etc.
yes. And also, but see, what I was trying to say is that while we are writing, when we are speaking, it's very easy to convey emotion, right? We are
Mm,
angry or we are disappointed or something didn't work out. But when we are writing, we don't have the luxury of tone. So we just are writing, and it could be interpreted in any way.
mhm,
So I'm used to writing, how to say, how are you? Hope you're doing well. Or you remember we touched on this months ago or something. So it's the person is not new, but I want to sound that I'm coming from a place of friendliness,
you're right.
and not so. mm, Should not that not be the case?
No, I'm not gonna tell you that should not be the case,
Mm.
obviously, especially especially that it's definitely sounds like it's your style of communication overall, and it's part of your identity, even in this case, right? Like
Okay.
for you, it's important to be, the polite and also give the context and the personal touch, right? And definitely, if that's part of your identity, then you're not gonna sort of trim on that. um, then maybe that is not for you, because not all the frameworks in the end and all the tips are for everybody 100% of the
Sure.
time. Um, but maybe you could use, if we're talking still about bluff, maybe you could use it in a different way and just highlight and bold that one sentence and then give context and whatever. I don't know. But I just want you to be aware that for general public or in general for people, that's the effect it's making, right? If you use it or not, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can make the choice, right? And for you, clearly, that identity bit is more important, which is fair enough, right? As long as you're conscious and intentional about it, that my job is done. Like I want people to consider
True.
the effect of their communication and the choices that they're making.
Okay. Very interesting insights. I'm just enjoying so much talking to you.
Me too.
And I just hope that the other audience also find it very fascinating. So let's come back to the whole point why you started this. What, in your opinion, is the importance of communication in STEM? What is the responsibility we as STEM people, whether we work in corporate, we work in academia, or why we should invest in good communication, why it is important for our career trajectories?
Yeah. It's a big, big topic, big question, and there are different parts to it. Let me start with the most morally appealing one. I think it's part of the ethics of the job to communicate your research, your findings, whether it's innovation, R&D, engineering, or neuroscience, whatever, because we're doing it out of passion. But I don't think we're doing it for the science. We're still doing it for people. We're doing it for making our lives more efficient, better, healthier, etc. I think that our passion is a big motivator, but the end goal is to serve community. And for that, I think we must simply, it's part of the job, and ethically should be compelled to be able to communicate your research, your finding. Because if not you, who's going to do it, right? Or who can do it even? It's you who are doing this research. It's quite unique in the sense. So there should be this component of kind of a must do it to a certain extent, right? Not everybody needs to become a keynote speaker. I do never advocate for that. But we must find our own level of effective communication and practice that. That's pretty much it, you know? And
So,
then in
and
terms of,
also, yeah, please go ahead.
yes, and then in terms of what's in it for you, basically, I think effective communication in STEM is going to give you whatever you want out of your career. It can give you better funding, more funding, new collaborations. I have convinced people to work with me out of their own funding, like set up a consortium of international collaborators where, well, the science is there. And I think in a lot of situations, it's kind of taken for granted even that the science is there, that the interest is there, because we're going to find collaborators from similar fields and complement each other, right? But if you cannot communicate your idea in an effective way, you're not going to get people to work sort of for free or with their own funding for it, which happens a lot of research. We collaborate on papers. We say, we
Mhm.
set up, okay, we're not going to get paid, but we're going to write an article together and that's beneficial. Or come to my lab and you're going to get hours in my lab for free without having to pay for that lab. But we write an
Mhm.
article together or send you an intern or whatever. Or at least that has been the case for me. And it's been fruitful and fantastic. And actually, the best part of my research happened like that. But why other people couldn't do it? Well, because they couldn't communicate their idea. They couldn't communicate that impact that the work would make, right? And for that, you still need to have clarity on that yourself, and then also be able to push it differently depending on the audience, again, like, or audience depending on who you're talking to. Because in my case, I had to set up my PhD by myself in the sense of finding the funding for it and finding all the collaborators for it, etc., writing the proposal in the beginning. In STEM, it's not that common. Sorry, in the space, it's not that common. I know that in other STEM fields, it is more common that you write your own
Mhm.
proposal and all of that. But in aerospace engineering, it's actually not common at all. And people were kind of shocked that this is the way it happened. But that way, I got to build something that I really believed in. I really wanted to do it this way. And again, if I couldn't sell it, and I mean sell it in the sense of put it forward to the people the right way so that it spoke to them and they invested in it, either their time or money or expertise or tools, well, then it wouldn't happen. And then in terms of career progress, promotions, like knowing the impact of your work is actually the main differentiator of whether you are going to get a promotion or not. And promotion can be different in terms of seniority, right? Or even getting teams, like being in charge of projects, getting funding to do your own projects or more research, etc. And that comes also from knowing the impact of your work and being able to present it in a way that is, well, effective, right? And in leadership, I think if you're already at the level of leadership in STEM, I think it's not only about even your experience anymore. It's even going to be about the experience that your team has working with you. Because whether or not you communicate clearly, effectively, or maybe even in
Yeah.
an inspiring way, it's going to
Yeah.
change how people feel working with you.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Sure.
the
Yeah.
lack of clarity, lack of transparency, or lack of vision, even, or even the right words, like when you're talking about strategy or a project, that can really break it for people who are working sort of under you if you're in leadership at that point. So I think it's really defining in the sense it could shape your career and really define how you experience it as well.
Nice. And I think also it's you put it nicely, but I also think it's also our responsibility in the age of this misinformation which is floating around, because we are the ones generating this knowledge, this, so we should summon, spread it in a way that it's true and real, not all the influencers. I'm not saying that they're doing wrong, but you know, uh, I think there's a lot of misinformation floating about everything
Yes.
from
Mm.
bacteria to space, everything. And there are a lot of theories floating around. And I think it's our responsibility that we should communicate our research. And that's the objective of this platform also. So you work in this field of STEM communication and you have your own platform. For our purpose of our audience, would you like to explain what you do and what your platform is all about?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
So
no problem.
here we met through Substack,
Yeah.
and I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk about this in detail.
Yeah, me
For
too.
me, people who find me on Substack, they can get practically the best tools for STEM communication, whether it's oral, presenting your work at conferences, or written, like writing reports, writing theses, even, or other maybe small tools that we talked about even today. And that's my platform of connecting with the community. Like my idea with the Substack is really building a community where people engage and ask me questions, and we can even have live audiences, etc., to learn together. Because really, my mission is making it accessible and fun for people to be able to use effective communication tools in STEM. And from that platform, with the people in my community who are engaged, when we take it further and we can go deeper and do one-on-one coaching and make workshops where I can go into details actually with people onto their barriers, like we talked about before, and train and find that comfort zone. Right? We talked about finding the comfort zone with your emotions, or humor or not, storytelling or not, or which kind of audiences and how to engage them, etc. So all of that takes practice. And well, with a coach, you can step by step realize yourself, okay, what am I comfortable with? And here's where I draw the line, or I'm willing to try this and not. And of course, there are a lot of methodologies and tools. And me as a coach, I combine methods from debating, competitive debating, and communication in general, public speaking. And I see what works in STEM both through the lens of my own experiences, but also by observing and teaching others, and from the previous experience of teaching university students and PhD students. So basically, the specter is broad, and also the opportunities to grow and try in terms of making your communication more effective is endless. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get out of my comfort zone every now and then, and I think it's fun. And so once again, I really want for people to find that fun element for themselves, to really get hooked on that as well. Because then it's just pleasure, just talking about what you already love doing in a way that you feel that connection with the audience. That's just great.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you for explaining it so eloquently and making it fun for us also. I learned so much and what I was doing wrong. Some of my big notions were, you really crushed upon them that this is the way, and I could see them in a different light. Thank you so much for doing this with us. This, I think it's one of the very valuable podcasts of our platform.
Thank you so much, Veronica, and thank you for this talk. I really enjoyed how you gave the honest examples from your work. For me, it's really interesting to bounce off that, and thank you for sharing that. It takes courage as well. So, and I
Thank
had a
you.
lot of fun today. Thank you.